Huge explosions are reported in Yemen as Israeli warplanes hit strategic targets occupied by the Houthi rebels. This is Israel's first response to the attack on Tel Aviv by a Houthi-launched drone that killed one person and wounded several others on Friday morning. In this report, we will go through minute-by-minute details of Operation Long Arm, as Israel's retaliatory strike was called. There's no doubt that it will change the strategic equation in the Middle East. Already on Sunday morning, the IDF intercepted a missile fired by the Houthis at the Red Sea resort city of Eilat, and that might be just the beginning. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken warned that Iran is about 2 weeks from full nuclear capability and will break down what that means. Also, over the weekend, the IDF eliminated a senior Hizbullah official, Ali Jafar Matuk, commander of the Radwan force, and the IDF continued to pound Hezbollah weapons storage facilities and other positions in southern Lebanon. In the Gaza Strip, the IDF raided the UNRWA headquarters and high-rise buildings that served as a Hamas terror headquarters in the city, resulting in the elimination of over 150 terrorists. There's a lot, so let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, and this is your Boots on the Ground report about what is happening in Israel on the 289th day of the war against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, and the Shiite militias in Syria and Iraq. It is very important to understand that behind all of these terrorist groups and militias is Iran. We start today's reports in Yemen, where on Saturday afternoon, huge fireballs lit up the skies in the port city of Hubayda in the western part of the country. The Israeli strike, which was in retaliation for a Houthi drone strike that killed one civilian and wounded several others in Tel Aviv, in Israel, on Friday morning, destroyed the main fuel pipeline controlled by the Houthis, as well as other energy infrastructures. The IDF, which took responsibility for the attack about an hour and a half after it was carried out, added that the Israeli defense system is strong and that there is no change in the directives of the Home Front Command, but emphasized that the defense is not airtight. The IDF statement also clarified that this attack was in response to hundreds of attacks against the State of Israel in recent months, aimed at energy infrastructure and the port facilities which were used by the Houthis to import weapons from Iran.
In the area of the port, the Israeli Air Force struck dual-use infrastructure used for terrorist activities, including energy infrastructures. Israel's necessary and proportionate strikes were carried out in order to stop the Houthi terror attacks. However, this threat goes far beyond Israel. The Houthis target other countries in the Middle East, the United States of America, and the world with their attacks on international shipping in the Red Sea, and not just the Red Sea. Who is behind the Houthis? One country, Iran. The Iranian regime funds, arms, and directs the Houthi terror activity. Israel is fighting a multi-front war against Iran's aggression proxies, Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Iranian militias in Syria and Iraq, and the Houthis in Yemen. The International Maritime Coalition, led by United States Central Command, as well as the IDF, have stopped many of those Houthis attacks in recent months. We see common interests for all countries attacked by Iranian-backed Houthi terrorism to stand together against this threat. Today, this was an IDF-only action. I want to repeat it. Today, this was an IDF-only action. We will continue to defend the people of Israel from all threats, near and far.
In response to reports in Arab media portals that the United States and British aircraft took part in the strike, American officials were quick to point out that Israel acted alone. Israeli officials also said that they had notified the United States before carrying out the attack. So let's dive through how the operation was carried out and what preceded it. To start out with, this attack sends a message to everyone in the region, both our friends and our enemies, that the IDF can strike very far away. In this case, 1,800 kilometers from home, from the Jewish state. This strike reportedly included dozens of F-16s and F-35 jet fighters, F-15 heavy bombers, and aerial from the 669 reconnaissance units were also on station to rescue any pilots if their planes were damaged in the battle and had to be abandoned. Electronic warfare aircraft were also on station at high altitudes to monitor the situation and coordinate the attack. It was a highly complex operation, probably the most complex that was carried out by the Israeli Air Force in many years. The target of these strikes was the port city of Hudaydah, the largest gateway in and out of Yemen that is controlled by the Houthi rebels. Although it is widely acknowledged that this port was used by the Iranians to send weapons into Yemen, the United States and other Western countries avoided hitting it because it is also used to send humanitarian aid into Yemen itself. However, there are two other ports in Yemen that are used for this purpose, and Israeli officials said that the strategic benefits of hitting the Houthi-controlled energy and economic infrastructure in Hudaydah outweighed the risks. The plan began to unfold on early Saturday morning, when approval for the attack was given by the Defense Minister Yoav Gallant and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The Nachshon aerial reconnaissance and electronic warfare aircraft were the first two to take off, heading to their stations high above the battlefield. The helicopters from the 669 unit launched next in order to be available for any rescues that might be necessary. A few hours later, after they had been armed and fitted with external fuel tanks to enable them to stay in the air for an extended period, the fighter jets were launched. Around the same time, the aerial refueling planes also took off. The flight from Israel to Yemen took several hours, and the attacking aircraft were required to fly at low altitudes to avoid radar detection. When they arrived in the skies of Hudaydah, they wasted no time but quickly hit 12 targets, including fuel storage facilities and refineries. After hitting their assigned targets, the Israeli aircraft immediately began the long journey home. No Israeli aircraft were damaged during the operation, and all returned safely to their bases in the Jewish state. The videos and pictures of this port in western Yemen on fire were flashed all over the world, bringing attention once again to the Middle East. Now, let's take a look at some of the strategic implications of this Israeli attack. The port of Hudaydah was the center of massive criminal smuggling operations, which the Houthis used to bring in an estimated amount of $1.8 billion a year in revenue. Most of that money is now lost to them, and it won't be easy to replace. However, the Houthis are putting out statements saying that they're not intimidated by this attack. A spokesman of the Houthis have issued a statement warning of a ferocious response to this attack, saying that the Israeli enemy launched a brutal aggression this evening against the Hudaydah district and hit the power plant that supplies electricity to the area. We will respond to these attacks and will not hesitate to hit vital targets in Israel. The Jaffa, Tel Aviv area is an unsafe area. This certainly is not an ideal threat, as the IDF reports that the Houthis have launched at least 220 weapons at Israel since the beginning of this war. Before the drone attack in Tel Aviv on Friday morning, all but one of these weapons have been intercepted by the United States warships in the Red Sea or by the IDF, and the one missile that got through these defenses landed in an open area in the desert outside Eilat, Israel's most southern city. It was because no Israeli casualties had resulted from all of these attacks that the IDF decided not to retaliate. But on Friday, all of that changed. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also issued a statement saying that the port we attacked is not an innocent port. It was used for military purposes. It was used as an enemy entry point for deadly weapons supplied to the Houthis by Iran. They used these weapons to attack Israel, to attack the countries of this region, to attack international shipping lanes, one of the most important shipping lanes in the world. The operation hit targets 1,800 kilometers away from us and makes it clear to our enemies that there is no place that the long arm of the State of Israel cannot reach. Early Sunday morning, there was an air raid alert in Eilat. Does not underestimate the Houthi threats, and officials say that they take into account that there will be reaction from Yemen. Therefore, there are also preparations to give a stronger blow to the Houthis if necessary. In the meantime, the defense systems have been reinforced and put on high alert. In addition, an extraordinary situation assessment discussion was convened at the Ministry of Transportation in preparation for the possibility that the Houthis will try to attack civilian infrastructure such as airports, as air defense units intercepted a surface-to-surface missile that made its way to Israel from Yemen. The missile was intercepted outside the territory of Israel, and there were no casualties or damage. However, a disturbing announcement was made over the weekend by U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Speaking at the security conference in Aspen, Colorado, Blinken warned that Iran is not only getting closer and closer to the ability to produce nuclear weapons, but has also been publicly talking about this possibility since last April. Blinken added that this latest wave of nuclear threats was prompted by Israeli assassination of a senior member of the Quds forces in Syria. Iran launched a direct and unprecedented attack by hundreds of missiles and UAVs towards Israel shortly after that assassination, but this resulted in an embarrassing failure for Iran, as the vast majority of them were successfully intercepted. But Blinken pointed out that United States intelligence estimates were updated a year ago to indicate an assessment that Iran would be able to enrich uranium to 90% purity necessary for producing nuclear weapons in 12 days. He also said that more recent assessments make it clear that this could be done in only 1 week, if Iran's political echelon makes the decision to go ahead and do it. Blinken blamed former US President Donald Trump's exit from the 2015 JCPOA nuclear deal for this situation, although this is sure to be disputed.
On a late September night in 1979, an American satellite picked up 2 super bright flashes in the middle of the Indian Ocean. The next day, President Jimmy Carter called a meeting in the Situation Room. Everyone agreed. This was a secret nuclear test. But who was responsible? The first suspect was South Africa, but they didn't have the technology. So the US looked at one of South Africa's close military allies, a nation technologically advanced enough to stage a massive nuclear test and secretive enough to pull it off in the dead of night. Israel. There was just one problem. Nobody knew for sure whether Israel even had nuclear capabilities. And this is still true today. Even though the whole world assumes they do, Israel will neither confirm nor deny it. But why? There's a Hebrew word for Israel's nuclear policy, amimut. It basically means deliberate ambiguity. Experts guess that Israel has between 80 and 400 nuclear warheads today, but nobody knows for sure. Israeli leaders have always been quiet about their nuclear ambitions. A strong military defense has been the cornerstone of Israel's survival since its creation in 1948. David Ben-Gurion was apparently obsessed with developing nuclear weapons, seeing them as the only way to protect Jews in their homeland. In those early years, France was one of Israel's biggest supporters, and the two countries worked together to develop both of their nuclear abilities. By the 1960s, Israel had constructed 2 nuclear research centers, Dimona and Sorek. It's around this time that Israel is thought to have developed their first nuclear warhead. During a meeting with President John F. Kennedy in 1962, Shimon Peres, Israel's Deputy Minister of Defense, was asked about Israel's nuclear plans. He responded with a line that would come to define the country's nuclear policy. "I can tell you most clearly that we will not introduce nuclear weapons to the region, and certainly we will not be the first." That line was the birth of amimut as a political policy. Other politicians, like Golda Meir and Levi Eshkol, didn't like Peres's answer, but they ended up adopting it, never confirming nor denying anything about their nuclear power, because it basically summed up their position. Israel has no intention of being the first to attack their enemies with nuclear weapons. By the 1970s, Israel's Arab neighbors, who had spent the last 2 decades waging war against the Jewish state, were suddenly worried. Like the rest of the world, they had no idea how many nuclear warheads Israel had. By keeping quiet, Israel let rumors fly across the Arab world. Eventually, these hostile countries stopped waging wars so often. Some believe this was in part because they were scared of what might happen. As Peres put in his autobiography, "We learned there is tremendous power in ambiguity. Doubt was a powerful deterrent to those who desired a second Holocaust." In fact, there's a nickname for the kind of situation Israel would have to find itself in before they'd consider nuking their enemies: the Samson option, evoking the biblical character of Samson, who famously killed many Philistines in his final act, killing himself in the process. Critics of Amimut don't buy this argument. They see Amimut as something Israel hides behind to avoid international scrutiny. Along with India, Pakistan, and South Sudan, Israel is one of the only UN member nations to not sign the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, precisely because of Amimut. They just don't talk about their nuclear program. And because they never signed the treaty, international inspectors haven't been able to check their facilities. Supporters of Amimut argue that dropping the policy now could lead to nuclear proliferation in the Middle East. If Israel were to show its cards, it could create an arms race, particularly with Iran. Israel's main goal is to prevent nuclear proliferation at all costs. Sometimes that means keeping secrets. Other times, it means being proactive. Over the last few decades, Israeli forces have attacked and destroyed nuclear facilities in Syria and Iraq to stop their nuclear expansions. Cybersecurity experts believe that in the early 2000s, Israel teamed up with the United States to create the malware called Stuxnet, which caused one of Iran's nuclear facilities to malfunction, essentially putting the kibosh on their nuclear aspirations. These aggressive measures share the same goal as Amimut, making sure there are as few nukes as possible in the Middle East. Almost no country is actively threatening nuclear war, but governments all over the world keep researching nuclear weapons. And it's not like nuclear power is an open book. Every country is cagey about this subject. Israel takes that a step further, but it's a strategy they've made clear, both in words and actions, aimed at keeping the peace. If Israel drops Amimut and finally shows her cards, it probably means that nuclear war has become a real threat. Or maybe the threat is finally over and we have achieved world peace. Here's hoping it's the second one.